Welcome back to the Ox Founders Global podcast. Today, we're delighted to be joined by Neil Shah, Head of Tech and Primary Markets at the London Stock Exchange. Neil breaks down what founders need to know about IPOs, London's global position, who it attracts, and key lessons from scaling from startup to public company. Plus, we debunk common myths about going public. If you're a founder thinking long-term, this one's for you. Thank you so much again, Neil, for joining us today. Is there a right size for a company to consider an IPO? And if so, what kind of revenue, valuation, or growth milestones do you think founders should aim for when they're considering this step?
Lucas and Morgan, thanks very much for the opportunity. There's probably a minimum size before investors really start to wake up and pay attention. And I think the closer a company is to about £100 million of market cap, the more investors you're likely to find. But the beauty of London is that you can take a company with 10, 20, $30 million of revenue public today, which was often the case in the late 90s in the States.
The Nasdaq often dominates the IPO conversation for tech companies. What makes the London Stock Exchange a compelling alternative, and how would you say it compares to other local exchanges that people might have, both for UK founders, but also from founders from emerging markets?
Great question. So, first of all, if you're a British company, where else better to go public than your home market? And I think London operates in the sixth largest economy in the world, but we've got the third most active stock exchange, not just this year, but really over the last 10. And a company of all sizes can find great support here, large and small, which sadly isn't often the case in the States, right? Also, we find that, over the last 10 years, about 28 British companies have gone public in the States. 20 of those have raised north of $100 million, and only 4 of those are in the green. And that's not just British companies going to the States. It's the US is really hard to crack as an international business. But London, we're the world's most international exchange. 36% of our companies are global. We've got 115 African companies that are either listed here or dual listed here. That's hundreds versus tens, really, in other markets. So I think this is a great home for international business as well as those domestic, where you can get investor attention, analyst attention, but also robust valuations and liquidity compared to other markets.
You've mentioned before that you consider yourself an optimist in tech. And I was wondering if you might be able to talk about a couple of stories or maybe a stat that fuels your optimism.
Sure, Lucas. Let's look at the companies that we've got in the UK. We've got so many unicorns, but unlike 2000, a lot of these unicorns have revenue. They're growing. They're real companies, real teams. They're profitable. So if I look at the companies we've got on the FTSE today, including my own LSEG, about £55 billion of market cap, there are companies which are probably going to be larger than us in a few years. And that gives me tremendous excitement and hope, because I know that if we carry on this trajectory, that the FTSE 100 is going to look very different in the next 5, 10, 15 years compared to what it looks like today.
3 quick-fire questions, advice for founders. The first question is, are there any misconceptions that founders often have about IPOs that you'd like to address?
Oh, Morgan, how much time do you have? There's so many, but let's start with a few. First, the IPOs are dead. If a founder wants to build a big, sustainable business with evergreen capital, there's no better place than public markets. So that's the first misconception. The second is that it's really tough to build outside the States. I think the US does have some advantages, but I tell you what, if you can crack the UK, Europe, and Asia from the outset, that just makes you a better company. And I've spoken to so many founders who started off their businesses here, and they learned to export pretty quickly. And I think those benefits really come down the line, where you can build a business perhaps much more efficiently without hundreds of millions of dollars of venture capital. So I do think there's life outside the States, and what better proof point than the fact that the largest tech IPO this year was outside the States in Dubai.
If a founder is 3 to 5 years away from IPO readiness, what would you say they should be doing right now in order to prepare?
Executing. It's very easy to get distracted with the next fundraising round or an IPO, but ultimately what's going to drive the value of a business, it's going to be that execution, and people will focus on the scale of the business, the growth, all sorts of metrics, profitability and cash flow included. So just continue to execute and win is really where founders and CEOs attention ought to be.
And the last quickfire question: what's a piece of advice that you give to every single founder who approaches you about a potential IPO?
Don't obsess about valuation and price. It's just a point in time. And as long as you're executing, everything else will take care of itself. Stock prices move up and down for all sorts of reasons. And sometimes, and most often, those are for reasons outside of your direct control. So don't worry about that too much.
Our last question is if you had to choose one historical figure that you think would have made a great IPO ready founder, who would you choose and why?
Having studied economics, I'm probably going to have to go with Adam Smith here, who really understood division of labor. So I think he would make a cracking unicorn founder where focus matters. And I'm sure he would build the right team around him to execute properly.
Good answer. He's going to go up on our leaderboard.
Great to hear.
Thanks so much, Neil.
Thanks so much to you both as well. And I love what you're doing at Oxford Founders. Keep it up.